Marites Tiongco. Most of the SSD staff are very familiar to her, but I will still give a short presentation about my profile. Marites Tiongco is a research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute based in Washington, D.C., more precisely in the Market, Trade, Institution Division. But she is outposted. She's based here in the Philippines, still working for IFPRI. But prior to joining IFPRI, she has actually worked here in the SSD division for several years. So most of the SSD staff are very familiar with her. We are very happy to have her back. I'm not saying that she's now working at SSD, but we're very happy to have her back to give us this seminar. Marites also provided some research assistance to the World Fish Centers while she was here. And her research interests are on socioeconomic survey design, data management, econometric analysis, and project management. Marites has a very wide experience working in different regions, especially South and Southeast Asia, East and West Africa. Today, she's going to be talking about optimization of sample survey design, the case of the ACLA control project. I can project that this is going to be a very interesting presentation. We do a lot of survey here, and I'm very happy that the audience is already quite big. And Marites, please, you can go ahead with your presentation. Welcome forward, Dave.
Thank you very much, Bob, for the nice introduction. I so glad it. It's good to microphone. Say I won't be able to see my slides. Okay, I won't be able to see the. I wasn't expecting that this would be too formal, and I'm happy to see a lot of familiar faces here. I was expecting Dr. Paris to be here because she was the one who initiated this and who invited me to present this talk today. Okay, so just a very brief background. This is not originally from me. This is presentation by our colleague, Dr. Hugo de Groot of CIMIC. And so I'm so grateful to him that he shared most of his slides to me. He's my collaborator in the aflatoxin project. I will tell you more about the aflatoxin project later on, but my focus now is on optimization of sample survey designs. It's actually for household survey designs in developing countries. Okay, as an introduction, we all know as economists that we routinely design our sampling framework and implement household surveys without sometimes thinking of how accurate or precise our sample is. If we have lots of budget or money, we can do just say sample all of the households, right? But then that is our constraint. We don't have that budget. So yet most of us were not actually trained to do sample survey methodology or survey design. So we just go straight. Sometimes we just go straight to the field, randomly collect the households, and then start the survey. We don't think about the survey design or the methodology. There are textbooks on sampling techniques. The classic ones are William Cochrane's and the very simple one by Graham Carlton. These are way back in the 70s when I was still doing my BS. Okay, but the question is whether it's a concern for economists, the survey design. Yes, it is, because just like any economic problem, that we have an objective function which is to maximize the accuracy of estimates to be obtained from the survey, subject to the constraint, as I said, the budget and the costs. And the objective of optimizing the sample is that to calculate the best sampling strategy with a given budget and minimize the error or the root mean square error. There are a lot of sampling designs out there, starting from simple random design or simple random sampling, stratified sampling, two-stage sampling, systematic sampling, and so on. I'm going to talk about the simple random sampling and the two-stage random sampling. Okay, from theory, the summary statistics for sample surveys are, of course, you're all familiar with this: population mean, variance, standard deviation, coefficient of variation, and the bias of if the mean, the sample mean is not equal to the population mean, then there exists a bias. If not, if they're equal, then the population, the sample mean is unbiased. And of course, the standard error. The precision in simple random sampling can be dealt with by optimizing the root mean square error of the simple random sample. So the formula is there, as I said, it's just minimizing the error, which is the variance, and then the bias risk. And we optimize that subject to the cost, which is for simple random sampling. These are composed of the fixed cost per village and the average cost per household. Based on other surveys, we would be able to know the fixed cost per village and the average cost per household. There are, of course, other variables that you want to consider when you do simple random sampling, like those, if you want to do specific villages, like those who are farm households or farm villages, and then if you want to do some gender gender disaggregation, which you need to do the stratified sampling. You can also do when you do simple random sampling, but that will be exposed, because you just do randomly sample all the households or the number of households depending on your budget. And then after that, you can divide which ones are female and which ones are male. But then that would be very costly. As you can see in our standard error, as you increase, you have to increase the sample size in order to get a precise sample or where you can optimize your sampling. So, for example, in this case, the sample size has to be 300 in order to get at least a root mean square error of 5%. And then when it comes to budget, it's also expensive, as I mentioned, for the simple random sampling. Okay, so why do stratified two-stage random sampling? We do this because we want to have, sometimes we have to do the groupings. And like, as I mentioned, we can do like by province or say by sublocations or by districts before we go into the second level, which is households, or by village and then households. And then within the household, you can do intra-household, which is by male, female. The problem with stratification is that you increase the error, the standard error, but then you would reduce or minimize the cost. So to balance that, we optimize the design. And in optimizing, as I mentioned, we do two-stage or even three-stage. So for our primary strata, for example, we do village for enumeration areas, and then for our secondary sample, we do households or rice farming households or individuals or even children, depending on the objective of your survey. So for example, again, you see similar statistics here. You have the population variance, but then you have two variances: the between villages or between strata, and the within village or between households within the village. This two you have to minimize in order to get an unbiased estimator. And as you can see, the stratification provides a more precise estimate based on the standard the error or the variances as shown here. They are smaller compared to the simple random samplings variance. Okay, not going to go into this detail because I'll give an example later on using our project, our survey on alpha control project. But for now, you can remember, please remember that M would be your strata, and then N would be your, no, it's other way. So N is your strata or your village, and then the second stage would be your households or your M. Okay, there's a note there that do not use simple random sampling in the when you sample districts or divisions or subdivisions. That is your first stage sampling. Why? Again, because of the precision, and the variance. So the problem with doing this simple random sampling is you're not taking into account the population of each strata. So the common practice is to do the proportion proportion sampling. Proportion to the population, probability proportion in your survey. So in our case, it's the maize producing rural households. And then we define the strata, which is the maize agroecological zones. It is already there, I mean, it exists, the agroecological zones. And so we just get the map and then overlay the population from there. So we know the cost from the other surveys, which is the fixed cost, CO, for getting the samples from, for doing the survey in the village. And then we also have the fixed cost for within the village. This would include mostly the transportation costs, enumerator costs, and questionnaires, etc. The usual. So for those of you who are doing surveys, you're familiar with what I'm talking about, the components of costs. And then you have the variable one, which is average cost per household. All this you add up subject to your budget. If you're given a big budget, then you're happy because you can sample more, and then your sample would be more representative. Okay, the difficulty is getting the samples in the village, within the village, because mostly, unlike here in the Philippines where we already have, it's more systematic. You go to the village, you have the list of households, so you just do sampling from there. In Kenya or in African countries, you barely can find those village lists. There are on the board those who attend meetings and so on, but they're not really. They don't have the sense. They don't have censuses. So within the village or the small community, it's very rare that you can find the list. So it's preparation should be part of your costs. So you go there beforehand to get the list. When you go there, first day, you don't get the list. You just inform the village leader that we need the list of your households within the village. They're not really many, so maybe 100 or less, 50, depending on the size of the village. Usually it's up to maximum of 90. So the village leader would call for secretary, his or her secretary, list down those they do have some like government structure, so they would know who to contact with the village leader, within the village leader. So they have small government structure. So you have the secretary, the treasurer, and so on. So you can get the list the next day or two. And from that, then you sample, you randomly sample. It's also automatic using Stata. You just do sample and you get the simple random sample with replacement or without replacement. And then you have to think of the precision that you want, which is acceptable, especially for publication or journal articles. This, by practice, the precision has to be like between 10 to 50%. Oh, as I said, you need also to know other variables like consumption, production. In the case of our sampling, since we need the farmers who are planting or producing maize, so we also have to find or to know the area planted of maize within. Doesn't have to be within the strata. It could be nationwide or to be at the national level or regional level. Okay. Then we have the objectives of our survey. Some of the objectives are here. It's not really a big survey because we only had like 1,400 households. But then we were able to sample from different agroecological zones. That was because of budget constraint. Had we have more budget, we could have sampled more in areas where there are aflatoxin contamination. Okay. We gave information to our households before we do the interview. We did two sets, one with information, another without information. So it's really good to have a bigger sample so you can stratify at the third stage where you have to implement the survey with the information about aflatoxin and without aflatoxin. And then there's another one for gender aspect where you have to have only female respondents and then the rest would be male respondents. In the module of the survey questionnaire, there are specific modules that are intended only for women, like consumption and health aspects. Oh, so for those of you that are not familiar with aflatoxin and are very fond of groundnuts and maize, be careful because you can find them there, but you won't be able to see it unless you wouldn't know unless it's being tested. Now this is the problem, a big problem in our survey because unlike pesticides unlike pests or diseases, it's visible. But for aflatoxin, it doesn't. I mean, they don't know it. There's some indications like molds, but even if it's moldy, it doesn't follow that it is toxic or it has aflatoxin in it. You have to go to the laboratory and have it tested for you to know whether such crop is infected with aflatoxins or not. And this is carcinogenic. So the most common one that you'll get due to chronic exposure is liver cancer. And in Kenya, actually, this has been kind of, this has attracted the public health department because of the outbreak, several outbreaks from 2004, 2005, and 2006. And some people died, like 300 were infected, and out of that, 125 persons died with exposure or contamination of, or intake of aflatoxin contaminated maize. Okay, so here this is the same thing as I mentioned earlier. Only this time, when we do estimate optimization, before we do the linear programming, and we need all those complicated softwares. But now we have Excel, and it's very useful. Actually, I got the idea from Alice because she's my mentor in terms of Visual Basic, Excel, etc. She makes things simpler. So I found this in Excel. It's very easy to do. All you do is, since you have the formula for for the variance of means, the standard deviation, the coefficient of variance. So you just put all the formula there and then optimize using the solver. If you don't have that in your Excel, you just add it to your Excel program or software. So you go to developer, you go to add-ins and then you click on solver add-in, and then this, so that solver question mark will show up, and then you can use the optimization. Means solver for optimizing, maximizing, minimizing your, and it can also do with the new Excel version, it can do non-linear optimization. Unlike before, it's only linear. So voila, with the help of Excel, we were able to get our precise sample of 12 per supplication, and we have M is your households per supplication, and we were able to get 21 supplications. So our sampling framework, out of $90,000 budget, is 1,452 households from 6 agroecological zones. But again, it's not, realistically, you cannot get all those 1,452 households, right? So what we were able to realize was 1,344. Reasons behind that was some were not cooperative, others, well, did not have maize. And please note that in Kenya, there's always, most of the time, there's drought seasons. So they rather diversify, although they plant maize for subsistence because that's their staple crop. And so almost all the households have maize in their backyards. So I mentioned earlier what the problem that we face with aflatoxin. So we consider aflatoxin as jointly produced with maize, and the benefits of consuming that comes with costs. It could be health costs on the part of the consumers and also the producers, and it could also be production cost, loss in income. So, well, it's already there. I just mentioned that. Okay, let's skip that one. But are these costs imposed by aflatoxins private, or at least partially? We found that there's no evidence existing right about aflatoxin the marketing. So that meaning there's no premium for high quality maize in the market. So, and then there's also no market segmentation for uncontaminated products. In fact, since they're poor rural producers, what they do is they separate out the good ones from they do sort. They separate the good ones from the bad ones. The good ones they sell, and the bad ones they consume, which is very bad for their health. And they're not aware of that because they're, of course, insecure, food insecure, so they can do anything but consume. And they also feed it to animals. Animals provide milk, and also, but it's kind of indirect. But still, it's kind of, you will know the health effects chronic later on. So how did we estimate for the costs? Well, the usual thing to do is treat aflatoxin contamination as like an externality. And we assume that, you know, for the farms or the farmers are profit maximizers as well. I'm not going to go into details here because I'm not going to present that, but I'd be happy to do another seminar for this one because it's rather complicated. What we did, because we have a budget constraint, so in order for us to sample, we need to sample also the aflatoxin levels in the maize that they are consuming. So it's very costly. It's $2 per lab test, and it's not only one sample for that one household. We have to have like 5 samples for each. I didn't explain also how we sampled the aflatoxin levels here because that's another story. So for this, the objective, as I said, was only to look at the knowledge, attitude, perceptions about aflatoxin, and then to see whether they are willing to pay for quality maize and if they are willing to pay for risk-reducing technologies. These are just some of the characteristics of our sample households. Maize production is overall 70% of the share of income, total income. And they diversify more. So their income sources would be minimum of 3, maximum of 4. And it's coming from livestock, employment, and cash crops. So I did a simple calculation on the changes of what would be the effect of on income when there's some changes in production or in price. So the most affected ones are the net buyers. Usually from the dry mid altitudes and dry transition. Sorry, I should have told you earlier what's the significance of those zones. That's the dry mid altitudes and the dry transitionals are where the aflatoxin levels are very high. And so that's also where the recurrence of aflatoxin contamination happens every year. And that's also where there was a fatality of when aflatoxicosis was when there was an outbreak of aflatoxicosis in 2004. In terms of CAP indices, you would see here that, well, we would expect that in the drylands, because they already experienced the outbreak, you would have high knowledge index in terms of safety attributes, the causes of aflatoxin, and other pathways, which is the livestock and milk or dairy intake. But it's surprising that it's only in the causes. Most likely, this can be explained by the fact that they're actually relating moldiness and damaged grains to aflatoxins as actually part of what the extension officers have been telling them. In terms of attitudes, it's also high. Perception, very low. As I mentioned, most of them are not really aware of aflatoxin, but they know that the molds could also affect them. And in terms of practices, like using containers that would reduce the moisture level or maintain the moisture level content, that's also quite low. We should have been earlier. Sorry, I've already told you that. Okay, so one way to find out whether they are willing to pay for quality maize. Those are aflatoxin-free maize. We did an auction. The I mean, you're familiar with the BDM, the what's Becker the Groot Marshak auction bidding. So we have three products. One is aflatoxin free. That's labeled, certified, tested from the laboratory. The other one is visibly clean, and the other one is visibly not clean. It's moldy, discolored grains, and damaged with pests. So we also gave them participation fee of twice the value of the good quality maize. Again, it's interesting to tell you how we did this, but that could be another seminar also. So I'll just show you the results. So interestingly, they would like to pay for a premium for quality maize. And that is very, I mean, that's very good contribution for our project. So we're getting more funding. And in terms of one of the risk reducing strategies, we actually asked them 5, but that's hypothetical because this it's difficult and it's very expensive if you bring metal silos or other risk reducing strategies to every household and ask them if they're willing to pay for that. So we just use pictures and ask them hypothetically whether they would be willing to pay for storage facilities, like for this case, metal silos. And in our sample, there were 44 respondents who would be willing to pay for metal silos. So there's a decreasing demand as price increases, then your demand would decrease. And then we also found because metal silos are a bit expensive, they would rather pay for a discount than for a premium. But for the other aflatoxin reduction technologies that we asked them if they're willing to pay, most of them, I mean, all of them except the plastic silos were, because it's similar to the metal silos, they were willing to pay for a premium. And in terms of cost effectiveness, it's expected that metal silos would be preferred given that they have higher effectiveness compared to other risk reducing strategies. You might ask how we come up with effectiveness. We did an expert elicitation survey since these are not yet widely used and they're not disseminated in the villages, so we don't have measures for effectiveness of these control measures. So what we did was before we actually conducted the survey, we already did our homework and asked the experts on how they perceive, it's the perception of experts, how they perceive that this different technologies would be effective in reducing aflatoxins. And we also found out that in terms of price elasticity, it's income inelastic, price inelastic, sorry. So meaning they're not very responsive to any changes in the price. This one is for metal silos, but it's also true for other technologies. Okay, in sum, we have to define, I'll go back to the sampling framework and optimizing sampling. So we have to define your challenges, whether it be technological or personal. And then you always keep in mind what your objective is in the survey. And you have to set realistic expectations. Especially when you go to the village, there are so many things that you wouldn't expect to happen. Like, so you have, that's why you have contingency in your budget, because that would cover. It's not enough to cover all your expectations, but then that would be something that would help you. I guess that's all. If you have questions, can we start that later?
Any question? Any question?
That roadside hotel is in Mali. One of the villages that we went to. That's true, that's a hotel. Sorry.
But, yeah, please go ahead.
Your question was willingness to pay. Did you have a follow-up study for those who said they were willing to pay, whether they're actually paying?
Yeah. The method that we used was double bounded. So the first question was, were you willing to pay? And then we have a starting price. The initial price would be the market price, the existing price in the market. And so if they're willing to pay, we have a follow-up question. What would be the price? We have an actually it's incremented already. It's randomly provided to them the prices, 25%, 50%, 75%, 100% higher. And then if they're not willing to pay, the question would be, would they be willing to pay for a smaller discounted price? So we also give the increments less than 10%, 25%, and 75%.
So, but this is still theoretical.
Yeah.
So I wonder what the percent will be to actual adoption when the actual technology is introduced.
Yes. I agree with you, and so we are thinking of actually giving the intervention, the metal silos. There are already some experimental ones in the villages, but those are not
effective.
No, it's effective, but the cost is not theirs. It's subsidized. So there are communities that actually it's like cooperative. So they buy one big metal silo, and then farmers would contribute, and then it's a common storage facility for those households or community. And in some cases, like the Catholic Resource CRS, yeah, they subsidize for the metal silos, and the project, the study is ongoing, and we're going to also look at the effectiveness. But that's only for metal silos, because CIMIC is interested with that technology. But for other technologies, we haven't done that yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm waiting for Dr. Castillo to ask her question because she's more senior than me. The first thing is a matter of information. It's kind of curious because the former head of this department, John Flynn, came to IRRI from IITA in Africa. In Africa, he ate too many peanuts, and he actually died of cancer from aflatoxin. But my question is this. I'm interested, I've looked at 3 different surveys recently, and there's nothing wrong with the sample size or the survey design. What's wrong is with the survey itself. And let me give you an example, and I'm not going to name names in this department because they know who they are. And let me give you an example. There's a guy that came to me a week ago at Cornell, and he said he's been sampling 900 farms in South Sulawesi. Okay? So I said, I said, bring me a questionnaire. So the next day he came with a questionnaire. It was 38 pages long. I mean, it was every kid, what was his education level, this and that. I said to him, because his objective actually was to do something which is illegal around here, and that is to survey SRI, and pro and con SRI. So the problem is he had so much more data than he needed. I said, what percentage of the data do you think you're actually using on this survey? He said 30%. I think that was high. So that is a major problem, and it's a major problem in this department. I'm not going to tell you who is in charge. But the thing is, you have to start, and I think you've done this. I mean, I'm not criticizing your example, because it looks to me like one of the first things that I learned in graduate school a couple of years ago was that you should design your table and your graphs before you do the survey. And then you know what data you want. And then you don't get a whole bunch of data that I once went to these people, they had data sitting there, and I asked this one guy, what are you going to do with this data? He said, we're just waiting till we can decontextualize the survey. We can decontextualize the survey, so it doesn't have any meaning. Anyway, so that's my concern, because this is a major problem. And it's a major problem everywhere, particularly when you're surveying farmers, because everybody says, "Well, gee, I want to know everything," but you don't want to know everything. You want to know something specific, and that's the major concern that I have in terms of surveys. So that's my speech. And,
I definitely agree with you. In fact, based on experience also, during my first survey designs, it has to be rejected several times because I have to do like a very long questionnaire coming from.
of course, my other question is, how can you do your research in Santa Rosa and you're in India? That's another question. You see, I'm one of these guys that grew up face to face. Oh, my friends typically say, we telecommunicate.
We have Skype, face to face. But now I'm trying to, I've been trying to disprove you. That you are wrong. But now I'm beginning to realize that you are correct, because when you're working from home, there's so many distractions, and you cannot really focus on your work unless you're all asleep, and then you work. Luckily for me, my time schedule is just right, but I'm gaining weight because of that.
You're on
I have to
Skype.
be awake.
You're on Skype, right?
Yeah, I have to be awake at night to work. But now my supervisor told me that you have to come next week instead of like 2 weeks from now, because you're working very slow. So you see?
I'll talk to you later. I know all your supervisors.
Oh, then probably you're the one who told him that.
Other questions?
Regarding the sample optimization, is it the village level or at the project level?
The total sample size?
Yeah, I mean the optimization, is it at the village level,
Both.
the strata level?
Both.
And what happens, for example, after you have this sample, after this optimization methodology, what happened after the data collection, and eventually you remove some of the sample?
The attrition.
Yeah.
That's very well. That's expected. In fact, in our case, there were like 10% for those. Yeah, because you cannot really collect all of the data. If the responses are, in some cases, they don't know, but that can be done using the data mining method. Again, in statistics. So you have those confidence intervals. You can calculate for the confidence intervals for those attrition. It's really difficult because that's just a very small portion optimizing the sample. The difficult part is doing the actual survey, collecting the data. Making sure that the enumerators would really be able to collect the data well. You have to train them, make sure that they understand what you are trying, what questions you want to ask the respondents. And in our case, I did the survey questionnaire in English. We have to translate in Swahili and back to English to make sure that what they translated is the same as what I want to ask the farmers. And then you have to do pre-testing several times to make sure that your questions are correct, there are no overlaps with someone, and it's not too long. So as Dr. Parker said, you have to be specific for whatever your objectives are. You have to keep in mind, you just ask those questions that would answer your objectives and don't ask any other questions.
How much time did you spend in the field? You know, you're the one who designed the questionnaire, sampling design, and then you hire enumerators.
Yes.
So how much time did you spend in the field? Because afterwards, the results, no? You say these are our findings. When you don't know much about the situation in the field. So now I begin to question, you know, the validity of the conclusions of the author when, you know, it's a very long distance research. You spend a lot of time designing and then leave it to enumerators.
In my case, I spent 2 weeks at least in the field training enumerators, supervisors. We actually spend most of our time training, making sure that even if we are we have confidence that we can leave them in the field and do the survey themselves with the supervisors. Still, we have some errors in our data collection, but that's where the cost really would be beefed up because you have to go back and then ask the questions again.
Couldn't you do a combination of the qualitative first?
Yeah.
Before you design your interview schedule, you spend time immersing in the village situation. Design the questionnaires,
Yeah.
and then, you know, so that
Yes.
there will be more meaning
Of course.
to these numbers.
That's right. We did that actually. Sorry, I did not mention earlier. Before we designed the questionnaires, we went there. We went to some villages, not the ones that,
sample.
yeah, not the sample. So we went to a village near and far from the market, and then we asked a semi-structured questionnaire, like 2-page questionnaire, about their knowledge of aflatoxin, how much they consume, and then all those other demographic characteristics. But mostly how they perceive, how much they know about aflatoxins, and what do they do with the produce. Like, do they consume all what they harvest? How do they store the storage practices and so on. So those main points that we want to answer in our objectives. It really helped a lot because this is the first project I did with doing the qualitative first combination of what we call the Q to Q. So combining qualitative with quantitative research, and so it's really amazing because it might be expensive at first, but that would save you a lot of money later on because you can focus more on the questions that you want to ask later on in your structure, in your quantitative analysis or survey.
What are the implications? What are the implications of your findings for actual introduction of the innovation?
Well, right now it's more on the awareness. We have found that we have to educate the farmers on what aflatoxin is about. They know if it's moldy. For some, they would not eat it, but they would still feed it to their animals, and some they would process into. For maize, you can process it into wine. They think that that could reduce or even kill the toxin, but it's not true. So still, even for areas where there has been outbreaks, there's still a lot of education campaign that has to be done. And then for our case, because as I've shown you, the risk reduction strategies are price inelastic. So we're thinking of either subsidizing them first if the government is willing. Actually, we have dialogues with the government, and they're quite interested in investing some of that, and also our donor. But it's also good to really collect from humans the biomarkers, blood samples, because then we would know if they're really infected or not. So those things, it's still a lot of work before we really be able to inject those interventions. But we start with educational campaigns.
In the past, I remember Green Revolution days, we had the statistics department where you bring your research problem and they help you with the statistics. Whatever happened to that?
Yeah, I don't know.
We don't have them anymore.
You see, I also took some statistics courses way back in my BS, but I need a statistician to really do the sampling first, sampling decide. Although these days it's very user friendly, but still we have to ask for their advice on how precise our sample are.
I want to, following up on Dr. Castillo, I want to conduct a short survey. I have some questions. How many of you in this room have talked to a farmer in the last 2 months? How many have talked to a farmer in the last 2 months? How many of you, is it somebody?
Three.
Two people out of a whole room. What's going on? How many of you have talked to an agronomist in the last 2 months? Alice, 2 people, 3 people. How many of you have talked to a plant breeder in the last 2 months? Alex? You see, we have a problem. And now you're all in the ladies' dormitory. And you're you don't even by chance run into the breeders when you were over there before. I told the DG he had a serious problem because you were going to be isolated. And you are isolated. And none of you were at the Thursday. How many of you went to the Thursday seminar yesterday? Alice. 3 people. What are you people doing?
Why don't you go
What are
to
you
the
doing?
seminar?
Oh my
I
God.
can't understand that.
You see, you're lucky that I'm
No
just,
incentives.
what? You're lucky that I'm retired.
You can just imagine if he was the division head.
Okay, coming back to your presentation, you mentioned earlier that the lack of awareness was a big problem. Most people were not aware of the risks they're facing, consuming those products with aflatoxin. But I will assume that at the government level in Kenya, there must be some action there. They're doing towards that, and also from NGOs. have you inquiry on those actually? What are the programs related to that actually? Can any of them fit into your finding here?
They have, well, okay, how do I say this? We didn't really focus on the impacts of other studies, but we can see based on observations from our qualitative survey that there are spillover effects on the interventions, or like, for example, information campaign from the government. And there's also the World Food Program that's really working hard in the country, trying to educate and making the farmers aware. In fact, one of the interventions that they're doing, the use of tarpaulins in drying, we also asked that to our respondents. And there's some problem with that question, which we weren't aware only later when we already did the survey, was tarpaulins are not only used for dry maize, they are used for other purposes. So we have to separate out, disentangle the effect of, just dry maize and using it for other purposes. And we didn't ask whether in our survey whether they're going to use the tarpaulins for other purposes, or whether it would only be for aflatoxin, for drying maize. So those things sometimes comes up after you do the survey. So that's when you write another proposal, get funding.
Okay, any other questions?
Tess, thank you for this seminar. It's enlightening and interesting, but I think it will be more interesting if you will also give your audience an idea of the importance of aflatoxin in terms of its effect, the epidemiological side of it. Like how many? No, I mean, maybe in your next presentation, wherever that would be. Yeah. So I think that's one, because like me sitting here, I just wonder how many of the people in the area were affected with liver disease or whatever, regardless of the cause.
Yeah.
Something like that. And the next is I don't mean to put you on the spot, but in general, the way we do things at SSD, are we optimizing? Are we spending too much time, too much money on in our sampling design? Are we oversampling, the farmers when we do our survey? And do you think that we should, use this your methodology, as a practice? Should we incorporate that in all our survey? Anything that has to do. And lastly, you have like the optimized number and the real number, and it's true that you don't usually achieve what you want to optimize. Is there like an acceptable, reasonable?
Yeah, that confidence.
Yeah, and I wonder if you can say also something about the replacement option, like say for example you have this number of farmers to sample in each village, and then you have replacement. Is that something that you did here? How practical is that?
Done. Overtime. Overtime. Okay. I'll just select some. The first question, I'm not really in a position to answer that because I haven't really seen your surveys, but I can talk about my experience previously when I was here. Ours was what we did then way back then was purposive sampling. So we know our target population. Only we can say that those are case studies. Then you can calculate for the precision of the samples. They're not nationally representative, or even province-wise or regional-wise. They're not representative. Most cases, it's because of the budget. And of course, it would be nice if you incorporate, the correct way of getting the samples, because That way, you can reason out that, oh, my estimates are accurate at this level. So you're confident enough. If you use this method, you optimize your sample, whether it be as a small budget or a big budget, at least you have a certain coefficient of variation, a certain precision that you can tell everybody that, hey, I'm confident at 95% or 75% that my estimates are correct. The next one, sorry, short memory. Replacement. Okay, you can do with or without replacement, but for budget purposes, we do with replacement. And of course, for smaller sample size, because when you're already in the village, you only have to sample like 12 or 15 or 20 at most, and there are a lot of other villagers there. So you can do. You need to have a list of households for replacement, because what if the household that you have chosen in your random sampling is not available or is already dead from, they haven't updated the list, or it's they migrated already. So you have to have that replacement. And of course, if that household is very far away and you don't want to go there, it's up there in the mountain, although it's a good exercise, then you can replace. But no, don't do that. It's always a challenge to go up in the mountains and in that center. You have to have beyond reasonable doubt why you are replacing such household or such farm. So it doesn't have to be just the discretion of the enumerator. Hey, I don't want to go there. I mean, it's too hot. So and then I will declare that household, that farmer already dead. But in fact, it's still alive. So I would just replace. So those things. What if you go back 2-3 years from now, like the loop survey? So you would know that that household still exists.
Yeah, one more thing. You apply this optimization procedure and then you come up with a sample for the different places. Now you go to the field and you see that the reality are completely different and you have to do some adjustment. Now, when you do those adjustments, you come up with some slight changes on the numbers of the sample size. Do you go back to the optimization and see if you are still optimal at the optimum line? Or
yeah. That's why I carry my laptop wherever I go, even inside the comfort room. Sorry, yes, we do. So, like for example, if one village 1 has been selected in the precision, in the sampling, right? But then that village doesn't have the list. I mean, you ask the village leader, can you provide us, and then give him like 2-3 days, and he hasn't produced yet. So then you have to go to the next one. You have an interval that you follow. So there's a certain interval for randomly sampling the villages and also the households. So that would be next, and then that's when replacement comes in.
Okay, thank you. Any other question?
In the organization procedure that you use, you use values for the variances. Was that a assumption or based on literature, or you just specify this? And then, what was this values attained based on your actual estimates?
No, based on other studies.
Ma'am, you said values for the CVs and standard deviation.
Oh yeah, those were computed.
In the optimization procedure that you use, were these values attained based on your results? Were the estimates that you get precise and accurate?
Yeah, you have the formula. You plug in the values, and then you.
Based on your actual results. Say for example, diba yung compute estimates say for the infestation of the And
Yes.
so what is the measure of precision, say, for that variable? Is it accurate or?
Well, we have that level
Super.
that we set, like 15% accuracy or 10%. So it's
So yung
between 10 to
preset, but
15. Yes,
yung
it
actual,
Yeah, the
based on
actual
the
ones.
results.
Because when you do estimation, you also compute for the confidence. You estimate the confidence intervals after you estimate. So you have your estimates already, like regression. So you have the dependent variable, run it with the independent variables. You get the estimates for those coefficients, right? You compute now for the confidence interval and the confidence level, and then simulate that. You get a certain accuracy or precision percentage.
So na-attain.
Yes. If not, I have to force because usually that's the case. Because when you submit a paper to a journal, they would usually ask, did you do bootstrapping, jackknife? So what are those? So you have to make sure that your estimates are robust. It's statistics.
Any other question?
Econometrics. Di ba kayo ito?
Joy?
Any other questions?
Okay, on behalf of SSD, I'm supposed to hand you a little token. So should I give it to you now?
What?
Here.
Oh, really? When is my next one? So, this is one of my collections mugs. So, can I schedule for my next? Thank you so much. I can only get this after 10 years of service. Here, 2 hours.